Professor Barnett to introduce himself, then Professor Wilson, then Alex.
Hello, my name is Jamil Barnett. I'm a alumni here at Pepperdine's SPP. I'm also an adjunct professor at Azusa Pacific. I've been in law enforcement for 20 years, and I'm just excited about young minds wanting to change the world for the positive. Kurt.
All right, and my name is Kurt Wilson. I am an adjunct professor here here at the school, and I'm primarily a local government guy. I did quite a bit of state stuff as well, but I'm a local government guy as a city manager, as a council member, doing all those fun things. So I've got a law enforcement background as well, and a local government background. So I end up spending a lot of time talking about those two issues, and the class I'm teaching this semester is specifically where those two issues meet.
Thank you. Alex, I'm going to hand it off to you to kick us off.
Jess, and I'll be going on to the moderated questions. At the end, we'll have some time for audience questions as well. So please feel free to put them in the chat, or you can also speak up. I guess we're just gonna do the chat. I think that makes more sense. Okay, so going with our first question, Jamil, do you mind starting us off? So
Sure.
Why did you choose to go into public policy?
I really chose to go into public policy because I wanted to be a part of the change. Like I said, I worked in law enforcement, still do work in law enforcement. But when you're on the ground level, a lot of times things are imposed upon you. It's just, hey, do this, do that, do this. And oftentimes those policies don't make any sense. And then you start asking the question, okay, why are we doing this? Everyone kind of know that this doesn't work. And I understand kind of controlling for people who are resistant to change. But sometimes you're like, okay, this doesn't work. This group doesn't work. This policy doesn't work, but we still have to do it. And then you ask, okay, why are we doing it? And it's always they, they. And I always wanted to know who was they. And that's why I wanted to get into policy, to be able to make those changes, because I believe that we waste a lot of resources. We're not as efficient as we can be if we're not connecting the dots to what the line staff are doing to what's happening in the political environment.
Thank you so much. And Kurt, same question. So why did you choose to go into public policy?
Well, because as corny as it sounds, I felt like I can make a difference, but not in the normal way that everybody else says, like, hey, I want to help people and do all that stuff. Mine was, it might have been part arrogance. The idea of looking around, I got exposed to certain things. So as a teenager, every once in a while, I'd sort of get a glimpse into what went on inside of a city hall or one of those kind of places. So I would start volunteering for things. And I'm like, this is pretty fun. I like this stuff. I'm learning it. I like the people. And then I realized that some people got paid to do it. So I said, wait a minute, they're getting paid to do it, and I'm doing it for free. That seems odd. But I would watch how they would go through these complex problems, especially when it came to issues that around race or around sensitivity, some of those sorts of things, because the people who were making those decisions all fell into the same demographic group. None of them had been poor. None of them had been around this environment. They had no idea, but they were the ones empowered to actually make those changes. So I would sit back once I sort of had a foot in the door, and I would watch, and I would look at that and I'd say, no, they're doing it all wrong. They have no idea. Oh, they don't understand. So part of it was just saying, you know what? I think I could do better.
I like that. You both really spoke on wanting to get into public policy to make a change and being the change maker. I can definitely relate to that. And then also you briefly mentioned getting your foot in the door. So what were some obstacles that you faced getting your foot in the door, starting with Kurt?
The biggest thing was age, because I was starting that stuff very early. I was very impatient. So I looked at it like, hey, this is the best time to do it because I'm not locked into another career just yet, and I've got the time. So I started in my teens on commissions, and no one took me seriously. It kind of poo-pooed me. Oh, isn't it cute? We have the little young guy here. But I still learned and did all that stuff. So then by my 20s, I ran for the seat on the city council. It turned out I really wasn't very prepared at the time that I ran for council, but I won the election, and a year or so into it, I picked it up. Then I was prepared and I was good at doing the job. So I was doing it, but I was always looked at as just because of age, meaning that I must not have experience. And there was no way I could match the years of experience of everybody else. So when I was on the council in my 20s, everybody else was a grandparent. We had such a big gap, so they had these decades of experience. I couldn't match that. But my pitch was, I can't match you in scope, but I probably don't need to, because we're just trying to sort of fill some gaps, and I can match some things that you can't. So collectively, we sort of have the whole thing covered, but it was very difficult to get taken seriously just because of my age.
That makes a lot of sense. And Jamil, same question. So what are some obstacles that you faced getting your foot in the door?
I like to view them as opportunities and not necessarily obstacles. Opportunities to get better, stronger, wiser, those types of things. I'll share an experience as far as an obstacle in me getting actually into law enforcement. When I went into law enforcement, so a little background for me, I am from Compton, California. Compton, when I grew up in the 80s and 90s, was very, very violent, very bad. I remember seeing houses with doors kicked down by law enforcement. I remember shootouts. I remember helicopters up. I remember those types of things. I've been jumped. I've been shot at. I've had guns put to my head. I've had all those experiences. So when I went into law enforcement, I thought, okay, this is something I can make a change in. Well, I didn't pass the mental health portion of the health examination. They said that they didn't think that I was tough enough. And I remember my first day in training, there was a white girl who, like, one of the detainees called her a B. She went in the room in the closet and started crying. And I was wondering how in the world could this individual get into law enforcement without any bumps? And I had to appeal, go through all these processes. And they said that I wasn't tough enough. And I'm like, what else do I need to go through? So those are some of the things I believe that people don't really understand that exists. They kind of push it aside.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. You kind of touched on coming from like a different background and that kind of being an obstacle. So speaking of that, so based on your experiences, like what were some implicit biases that you faced, some everyday challenges you had to overcome, and how did you overcome them? And Jamil, if it's okay with you, I'll start with you.
You start with me?
Yeah.
I guess after I got working into law enforcement, I didn't see it as much, but I did see it. I do see it even now in my personal life, which is actually, it really hurts my heart because I serve the community. I teach civic engagement. I work in law enforcement, do all these things because I want the community to be better. When COVID, it's a bunch of different rules. We all should be wearing masks. So one of the first things I noticed is that when I wore a mask going into grocery stores, I noticed physically noticed people clenching their purse and kind of getting away from me. And that's hurtful because you're like, wait a minute, I'm the person that's trying to protect you, but then yet you're treating me like I'm a villain. And those things happen. I mean, every day I go out, I notice those things.
And how about you, Kurt? Did anything Jamil said resonate with you?
It did. So I have a comment on something you said, and I forgot the rest of the question, though. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So what are some everyday challenges that you faced? And how did you overcome them, specifically like implicit biases? Like, do people have anything to say about like your hairstyle, speech, background, things of that nature?
Well, I'll go backwards. So didn't have any issues with my speech because I speak in a way that's very comfortable. In this setting, I speak in a way that's very comfortable to the same types of folks who would be concerned about speech. So for me personally, that's not an issue. But like everybody else, I sort of code switch, and I talk different around different groups. And my family's from Jamaica, so I talk very different around my family than I would with other folks. But hairstyle, that's yes, that has been an issue, but only recently. So as most of you know, this isn't my normal hairstyle. This is just because I literally haven't gone to the barber since COVID. Um, so normally I have, just a very short, almost bald cut going through and doing some of those things. But the things that I notice that are sort of the everyday pieces are so the idea of racism is real. It doesn't, it's not that it's not a real thing, but it's not as simple as a person is racist or is not racist. They go through sort of these different levels, and most people view themselves as quality people. Hey, I'm a good person. I have a black friend. I'm great. I like this and that. They don't want to be racist, so they don't see themselves that way. I have a lot of people in my circle who are that way. Their intentions are very good, but they will say and do things and perceive things in a way that are very, very similar to a racist person. The intent isn't there, so that's sort of a different conversation of how you address that. But it's not that they're doing something on purpose, but they clearly have some real racial undertones in sort of how they do. And part of that group ends up being sort of these advocates. So we end up, as we're going through and trying to address race issues, we have sort of the people, the normal victims of racism, and then we have these advocates. So the advocates play a really important role because they normally have a seat at the table where nobody else does. So if you're the person who's typically discriminated against, you may not have a seat at that table. So having that advocate is very, very helpful. But the important distinction for me is we get advocates who come at us sometimes who are so adamant because they're woke. They've got this new thing. They get it. They understand that they're ready to go. So they want to jump in and fight for all these causes. And they'll fight these causes with very good intentions. And I go through this a lot in cities, but they're misguided. So with the person who's actually the victim, the government structure, the agency, whatever else, can have a conversation with that individual. And that individual, as the victim, has the ability to say, okay, we're past this now, or okay, I get it, I understand, this is what needs to be done. The advocate doesn't sort of have that license to give you a pass, to say, okay, government, this was okay. So instead, they just fight you and fight you and fight you. So I've actually had more luck dealing with people who were the actual victims than I have with the surrogates who are fighting on their behalf, because there's no end with some of those folks. So that's been sort of a confusing thing for me, of going through with these folks who clearly have some racial undertones in what they're doing, but they're well-intentioned, but they're coming at me in my government role rather than in my black guy role, trying to educate me on black people, because they mean very well, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then the last piece, the grocery store. So Jamil mentioned that part. Absolutely true. Everybody I know who, is of a certain complexion has exactly the same thing. It's a very uncomfortable feeling. And Jamil, I don't know if it's the same for you, but I find myself when I do go into the grocery store, as I'm leaving, even more now with the mask, I take that receipt and I hold it up so you can see it visually. So there's no question, especially if I bought it from the back of the store, but no matter where it is, I find myself holding up that receipt because I don't want there to be any question.
I guess I'm a little different. I'm not as nice. I actually want them. I actually want to be tackled by loss prevention. but that is, yeah. I just ball my receipt up, put it in my pocket, and walk out. And in my mind, it's almost like a dare. I dare you to do something that is outside of the law. I know that's probably not the best thing, but it's frustrating. Because I know how these systems work, so I know what to do if someone is doing something, that I can be actionable about. I'm glad you said that about the advocates, for people who necessarily their intent isn't to be racist, but they say and do a lot of racist things. And that's the same thing with me. I have a lot of friends who are not black, and they do and say a lot of racist things, and we have arguments about these things continually. And the reason why I have patience is because I know that they don't have bad intent. But then sometimes I have to question, because I'm like, wait a minute, I'm explaining to you, I'm telling you what I see from my perspective, I'm telling you what I feel, but you don't want to listen to that. And then you have also, like, I'm glad Kurt kind of said there's a spectrum, because it's definitely a spectrum, of, like, let's say like I'm in law enforcement. So you have these policies that saying, okay, the school to prison pipeline, mass incarceration, all those things, right? So we want to go ahead and do things to make sure we're not doing mass incarceration. But are all those things helpful? Right now, it's to a point where we don't want to lock up anyone that is a juvenile. And I think that is even worse to specific communities. Why? Because I'm almost incentivizing negative behaviors. If you've got caught breaking into 6 or 7 houses, caught, not that's something you broke into, you got caught breaking into 6 or 7 houses, and I continue to see you home on probation, what is to tell you that that's not something I should do? So what is this individual?
Going
He's done this for 3 or 4 years. When he becomes an adult, he's going to stop. You're going to give him a taste for taking things that aren't his. And then we're going to deal with that problem.
It's interesting.
going back to your other comment, when you're doing that explaining, do you ever get to the point where you just get tired of explaining the same things and you're like, you know what, I don't want to, I'm tired of explaining that.
Oh, I do. As a matter of fact, I'm on a thread with a few friends. It's about 5 or 6 of us. And we try to explain these things. 3 are Black, 4 are not. And I go days where I don't go on a thread because I'm fatigued because different things that come up in the news, they'll bring it up or we'll bring it up. And then one thing that I find out, a lot of groups believe that Blacks are monolithic, that we all think the same. And that's not true. Black people think differently. I think by my own, for my own. Now, how Black people are treated may be the same from different groups, but how we think are definitely different. And I think there's an opportunity definitely for actually conservatives. I didn't want to go here, but for conservatives to even bring on more Blacks, because more Blacks actually think conservatively. It's just the race problem they have.
You talked about.
Go. I'm sorry.
So no, I was going to say, you mentioned like being treated the same, and that's interesting because I think a lot of people assume that that's not the case. So a lot of people assume that, hey, if you're Black, once you switch how you dress, once you get a job, once you have a title and cool, whatever like that it goes away. And that has absolutely not been my experience. And at first I thought it was just me that here I am, I'm grown, I have a badge in my pocket, and I have a job and all those things. Pre-COVID, at least, I normally would dress in a suit or something, and but those issues still didn't go away. So I still have the same fears, the same concerns, the same issues of holding that receipt up when I'm in the store, even though I know who I am, and I know at the end of the day I can sort of prove it, but I know I'm treated a certain way, and I've been working temporary assignment up in Oregon, and I've been driving back and forth, but I have to go through an area that you may be familiar with I don't feel terribly welcome. So in that area, I find myself going 1 mile per hour below the speed limit through the whole place. I do this, I won't stop, no restroom break, nothing. I'm just going through because I've been down this road and I know how it's going to act, how it's going to end. But one thing I will say I appreciate about some of those communities is they sort of put their racism on display. They're not hiding it. There's no like, I have to guess. They put it out there. And honestly, I prefer that. It's sort of like wearing a name tag. I like when people wear name tags, so I don't have to guess what your name is and see if I remember it right. If it's right there for me, fantastic. So if you happen to be a person who, espouses racist beliefs and you want to put it on display, I'm happy to see that because I know exactly how to respond. It's easier for me. There's no guesswork, no trying to figure things out.
Oh yeah, I like that. I like that as well. I like it. I lived in the South for a little bit. I like it when it's up in front in your face, so I know how to deal with it. Versus it, I want to know that you threw my application in the trash can. I don't want you to hide and slip it in the trash can. I don't know about it. Yeah, even
no surprises.
Dealing with law enforcement, even now, I'm completely, even working in law enforcement, I'm terrified when I'm stopped Now I know what to do, but you know, I've had times where when I was a, a little younger, where you know, just my cousin has stopped because he said that he didn't have a seatbelt on, and you're wondering, okay, how did you stop him? We're on the freeway. How did you stop him from not having a seatbelt on, and you're at a standstill? And the police, I mean, it was highway patrol at the time, came out with his gun already drawn. His gun actually to the back of my head for a seatbelt. So, and you see beads sweating from his eyebrows, so you get a little more nervous because you're like, wait a minute, this guy may accidentally pull the trigger. Even now when I pull over, it's a little different. I still get pulled over sometimes. So when I get pulled over, especially when it's for nothing, um, I automatically I put my wallet on my dashboard. I don't want to be reaching for anything. I roll down all my windows, put my wallet on the dash, put both hands on top on 10 and 2, and I make sure they're clear about the direction that they're giving me. License registration, sir, would you like me to grab my license right there? It's in my wallet. Yes. So that way there's no ambiguity on what's transparent, what's the information going back and forth. Now, what does happen is when they open my wallet and they see my badge, they shoulders kind of go down, and it's like, okay, have a nice day, or you know, let me just, what agency you work for. That's what I normally get, but I don't think that anyone should really have to feel that way. Your interaction
No,
with law enforcement shouldn't be in fear. I'm sorry, Kurt.
All right, just a quick redirect.
Oh,
So
no,
earlier you mentioned a few examples in the workplace. So do you mind expanding on those? So like, have you seen the industry change? You kind of already touched on it briefly. So for either of you, you can go ahead and start.
Kurt.
go ahead, Jamil.
Especially in terms of like representation or like seeing more people of color, like maybe in the industries where you work, things of that nature.
Well, okay, I'll go. So I'd say for me, I've seen change. So if you were to just sort of take a look at the statistics across the board and say, okay, statewide, and we'll say California, number of particular race who are employed today as a percentage of the workforce compared to what it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago, I suspect you'll see an increase, but that level of data isn't terribly useful for two reasons. One, within the public sector, there are a couple geographic regions in California where you're much more likely to have diversity. So if you're in the Bay Area, if you're in Oakland, that over in that area, or if you're in the general area of LA, you're much more likely than you are in some of the other places of the state. So it's some areas do quite well with respect to representation within the workplace. Some do not do well at all. Some professions don't do well at all. So firefighting, in those two areas, you're very likely to see diversity of gender and of race, but you're not as likely to see that in many other places. And then the other piece with that is it's sort of the level of employment. So in a lot of those areas where they have strong numbers, you're very likely to see entry-level folks who are very diverse, but you may not see that same diversity reflected in the management ranks or in the executive ranks as you work through that process there, which speaks to sort of a different issue. One is sort of, is there a way to sort of get your foot in the door? And two is, does your organization have a system where it sort of values and provides those opportunities for promotion and that sort of thing, or for preparing people to actually do that? Is there a way to do that? Because if there's not, then you end up having the same issue of, yeah, they get in the door, but they're never going to be the boss.
And Jamil, is that something that you've seen in law enforcement as well?
Not necessarily in my agency. What I've seen, to Kirk's point, I think that's what he was saying. Sometimes your upper level management, that's when you start to see less and less diversity the higher you go. So you're wondering, okay, how do you get your foot in the door? And then I've noticed that sometimes, I mean, I didn't do any like scientific numbers or anything like that, but it seems like you can move up a little faster. Like sometimes we've seen the directors or managers and like, wait a minute, oh, how long have you been in the department? It's like, oh, I've been 8 years. You're like, whoa, 8 years? What do you mean? How are you that high up at 8 years? But um, that's something a little more difficult to quantify.
Yeah, and like, what are those like opportunities that you've seen for people to be able to kind of move up to those ranks, or like things that people have done to kind of get to that level?
Hmm.
So I've seen people go.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I've seen people who sort of go above and beyond. So people who are doing everything right and doing everything they're supposed to do. If they happen to fall in one of those underrepresented categories, that's basically not enough. So they've gotten used to doing more. So what I see is if a person of color or a female is trying to advance in an area that there aren't a lot of people who fit that demographic who are already there, they go above and beyond. The idea is that, look, if I'm on a level playing field, if I'm just as qualified as the other person, they're not going to take me, because if they have any option, they're not going to go with that thing that's different, that's unusual, that's unknown. So instead, I've seen a lot of people whose strategy shouldn't be fair, but the reality is their strategy is to become over prepared. So they do way more than their counterparts. And I've found a lot of folks who were in roles where they were first, the first Black, the first female, the first, whatever, where when you sort of look at them on paper, compared to other people, they really have gone above and beyond. And I think there's sort of a culture in among some agencies where that's what you do. So if you're one of those people who are in that demographic and the odds are stacked against you, you try harder, you do more, you prepare, you do all the things that you shouldn't have to do, but you recognize that that's the only way you're going to do it. In law enforcement, I've found females and people of color, just in my personal observations, who have gone on to get education at a much, much, much higher rate than their counterparts as part of that same culture. But people do what they have to do, because whether or not the rules are fair, they're gonna work their way to advance.
And Jamil, is that something you've noticed as well?
Yeah, that's something I notice is definitely as well. Um, I was taught. I'm just being open. It's a casual conversation that you have to be work twice as hard to get half as much.
And so just touching on like going on like above and beyond. So like so skill set wise, what have you noticed? Like have you seen like what kind of degrees are people getting, and like for what positions?
Oh, you talking? Is that for me?
Either of you.
I would say like in law enforcement, there's you kind of go up the ranks. There's not like too many back walls. You can kind of just jump up there. So like right now, I can come in with I can have my PhD in whatever. That doesn't matter. I still have to come up the ranks for the peace officer positions.
Okay. And then for local government?
So I've seen the most common that I've seen is public policy. So getting a master's degree. So I guess let me back up. Depending on what role it is, that sort of determines what the academic requirements are. Traditionally in public safety, there's, other than a high school diploma, there's in most agencies, there's no formal requirement for education. So people who want to go forward, they go forward. So maybe they'll get their associate's degree to become more competitive. Or maybe they get their bachelor's degree. If it's a public safety field, maybe it's something specific, or maybe it's something like sociology, or some kind of communication, psychology, something for sort of dealing with people. But for those who go on to beyond that, I usually see either some public policy, public administration, or law within the public sector. Very common to get either two of those, and that way just sort of especially if they're not locked into exactly where they want to land at the end. Those are broad enough where they get the skill sets for the people and the management, the budget, and HR, and all those sorts of things, but they can go off and do lots of different directions.
That's interesting. So then on that note, like what advice would you have for people who are just getting started, like young people of color who want to get into public policy?
Relationships are very useful. Despite the fact that we have this whole civil service process within most public employment that's designed to be everybody's treated the same, just what's on your resume, you ask them the same interview questions, you rate on the same scale, all that stuff. Despite all of that, I think relationships still matter for either knowing what's going on or to give that little edge and do some of those things. But it's sort of two-way. So on one hand, it's them getting to know you, because if the right person knows you, then they can say, okay, they can vouch for you. Yeah, that person's great. You know, they're a hard worker, smart, whatever it is. The other part is for you to know them, because you can go to school and get the technical things of here's how I, design something or, do whatever it is. But each organization's sort of got this culture, the way they do things, the informal way, all the stuff that's not written down. The better you can learn that, the better you're able to sort of predict and to sort of understand how to get in. So I think your chances of getting in the door are much better. So it's not simply, the one-way street of, hey, you should get to know me, but I should get to know you. That's where those sort of offline conversations, there are always folks who can connect you to somebody, take them up on those offers, have that conversation with, the manager of such and such or whatever it is. Those conversations are very valuable, and it sort of gets you into the pipeline to figure out how things work within that world. But they're very, very useful. Internships, informal conversations, whatever it is. Any high-level person, if you can get access, take it.
Thank you. That was very insightful. And Jamil, same question. So what advice do you have for people of color who want to get into public policy?
I would say try to find out what you want to do. Oftentimes, someone will say, "Hey, like I just want to go to education." Well, what part of education? Go get involved. Go get your hands dirty. Then also, as trying to move around or navigate that, be willing to do the dirty jobs. Be willing to do the undesirable jobs that no one else wants to do. Because that will give you access a lot of times, and oftentimes you won't be compensated for what you're worth or the work you're putting in at first. But you kind of have to pay your dues, understand the landscape. I now that I'm a professor as well, I kind of look at it also as like doing a research project. As some of you professors on here know, you can't just say, "Oh, I want to do a research project on education." Well, what part of education? Something that I can go ahead and be specific and tailored in, so that way I can go ahead and attack that. So that's what my advice would be. Find out what you want to do. There's a lot of niches. Find your niche. What works for you? What are your talents? And what's something that you want to go get?
Thank you. And we're actually going to start doing audience questions. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I think we have time for maybe like one more moderated question before we start over. So kind of on that same note of like people who want to come in. So we talked about like how they need to enter and kind of have like a better feel, relationship building, and like also making connections. So speaking of connections, was that something that you had in your experience? Like, did you have a mentorship or guidance when you entered this line of work? Like, was there anyone you reached out to when you first decided like, hey, I want to make this switch? And I'll start with Jamil.
Actually, I guess two things kind of happened. Someone identified me to put me in a leadership position, but I would take crap jobs. I would take jobs that no one else wanted to do, and I would do my best at it. It was all about I wanted to do well because I wanted to do well as a person, and then they noticed that, and then hey, we have this other position for you. Would you like to apply for that? So that's what I've noticed. That always put your best foot forward. You never know who's watching. You never know who's watching. So always put your best foot forward. Whether it's fixing coffee or dumping trash, do that with a smile and the best you can do.
Mm. I can definitely agree with that. You mentioned people are always watching what you do, whether you do it well or not, and I can definitely agree with that. And what about for you, Kurt? Was there anyone who mentored you, or you got sought guidance from when you were first starting out?
No. I wish I didn't have that, but it turned out really well because since I didn't have that, I just got in the habit of sort of, having to make my own opportunities or, insert myself and do some of those things. And that carried over well because now that's really all I know. So now as I have, a different obstacle or challenge or opportunity or whatever it is, my go-to is to fix it myself. But I would have benefited, I think. I think there were a lot of points, especially early on, that would have been very useful. Could have saved me a few steps along the way, but at least I learned, doing them the hard way.
And would you say that is that still the case now? So now that you're like already at your midpoint in your career, is that still the case in terms of like mentorship and guidance?
Well,
What do you go to?
Well, first, I think I'm past my midpoint in my career because
Okay.
I'm enjoying downtime a little more than most. So I like to think I'm nearing the end of it there. But yeah, in many ways it is. So within my formal profession, I have a lot of peers who are sort of in the same spot. So who are always available in the event that I needed something. I just just based on my personality and based on my history, I don't. I just don't do that. But I believe in the concept, and I provide that guidance to other people regularly. So even through ICMA, we have the in California we started the coaching and mentoring program, which has now gone nationwide. I still do that part there. I still do it with other organizations like MMA, MC, that kind of stuff. So I'm a wholehearted believer in the concept, but it's not something that I take advantage of myself.
Yeah. No, I definitely see you on the ICMate site for the
Mhm.
coaching section as well. Jamil, how about you? Now that you're kind of at your midpoint in career, is there any like mentorship? Like, are you either like a mentor or have you gotten guidance from other people now that you're like in the midst of your career?
I try to definitely do both. I have a couple mentors that I seek advice with regularly. How I'm going to navigate my life. I just think that it's definitely an important thing, just to have another set of eyes look at your journey. Because they may see things that you don't, especially if they're more experienced than you. My mentors normally tend to be 20 to 30 years older than I am. I want to make sure I get some people with experience that have learned some things in life.
That's a really good point. So I'm hearing kind of like mentorship of people who are like more ahead, but then also people who are at the same level. So both can be definitely sources of guidance. I do have one audience question. It was a direct message, so sorry you can't see it. So question was, have you seen any upward mobility with the degrees for people of color, and is it making a difference? And either of you, if you feel you can answer the question first, go ahead.
Yeah, there's definitely been more opportunity for people of color to move up. My concern is make sure that I know it's going to sound kind of wrong, but make sure you're getting the right people of color. Because sometimes I think that people want to fill a spot, and they fill that spot, and that individual may not be qualified, or they may not understand that position. Get someone who's already have a little experience. There's people of color everywhere. So I would prefer getting someone who knows how to do the job.
I'd agree. So I think there's sort of this cycle that goes along with it. So there are times when things are tougher for people of color, and then there are certain moments when this level of guilt sort of goes through the system, and everyone suddenly becomes very aware, and now they're very in tune and want to help and want to do some things. So most recently, post George Floyd, I saw a lot more interest from folks who really, 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 really want to target diversity and do some of those things. And I think it's fantastic. But having been down this road before, I'm very skeptical that this is the new baseline. I suspect it's more of just a blip. So at this moment in time, if you can benefit from it, get it while you can. but I am skeptical that this is a true, genuine shift, and that this is the new baseline for things. So I think getting there makes a lot of sense. But as far as that selection, I completely agree with Jamil. The idea that that people want to sort of check a box to sort of make themselves feel better doesn't do a whole lot of good. If so as a person who does a lot of hiring, obviously, I have a strong interest in diversity, but I need to be very, very clear with everyone that I have an obligation to everyone. So the same way that I'm trying to make up for discrimination that has happened to one group, I can't go out and discriminate against another group. So I can't say, hey, white male applicants, we're not really looking for any more of those, so forget you. I've got to honestly and objectively evaluate that same person, because I can't discriminate against them either. The goal is to get the most qualified person. What I can do is, and what many people who are in senior positions can do, is to help those people get the tools to become the most qualified person. We can, if they don't have the same access, or somebody to sort of help them along, or even just give them the tools, or open the door, or even show them the way where they can just go do it themselves. If you don't have that, it's very difficult to compete. So we have a lot that we can do on that end there. But the idea of hiring somebody just because they're Black, I think if you put a person who's unqualified into a position just because of the color of their skin, it's going to be a miserable failure. And then what's going to happen is the people who didn't like it in the first place will say, see, I told you they couldn't do it. And you're going to set back the entire group for another 10 years, because no other person is going to get that shot again. I think it's very important to have the most qualified people, and I think the energy is best spent on helping them get to that highest level of qualification. But yes, do I think the master's degree sets them apart? Absolutely, especially if it happens to be from a reputable place like Pepperdine.
Nice. That's really nice to hear. So actually, for the audience question part, if it's okay with you, if you've asked me a question for a direct message, do you mind putting up the little raise your hand symbol, and I can actually have you ask the question yourself. So starting with Jacob, if it's okay with you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to know what made state and local policy more appealing rather than, international foreign relations or national security. Was it something that, that you grew up knowing you wanted to do, or was it, through school, or was it through experience? What kind of cultivated that for you, and, teaching it as well?
Well, for me,
So
go ahead, Pert. Go.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Jamil.
It's funny that you asked that. When I first started at Pepperdine in the program, I was wondering what I wanted to do. I was like, wow, do I want to do international policy? Do I want to do econ? What do I want to do? Because those things, they sound so sexy. But I'm just like, at some point, I was like, hey, dummy, look, you already have experience working on the state and local level and in politics. Do that. So I went for what fit me. And then ultimately, that's where my passion was. It was just like I just saw so much more out there that was so intriguing that I wanted to do it all. But the state and policy is what fit me in my experiences and what I wanted to do in life.
So for me, it was kind of similar. The ironic thing is, in some ways, the higher you go up in that. So if you start local is sort of the bottom of the pile, and then city, and then county, state, kind of work your way up to the federal. There's a level of prestige that grows with that. So doing this international work, far more prestigious than being city manager of city X, some random place. So from a prestige place, that's clearly a better option to go. For me personally, the prestige wasn't that big a deal. I don't care about titles and stuff. That part doesn't really matter to me. So it wasn't very useful. What did matter to me was sort of the impact of things. So when I was working at the state, so I ran a couple agencies. I did some stuff at the state under when Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor, and so we got to set policy, dished out crazy amounts of money and set rules and training standards, all this other stuff. So we did all that stuff. So technically, we touched everything statewide, but I never got to see the impact of any of those things. I didn't get what I the way I get at local government. So local government, if I can figure out a way to build a park in a neighborhood that hasn't had, that's been overlooked for 20 years, I get to sort of see that look in the kids' eyes. I get to actually feel it and see it and do all that. The more detached I ended up getting from local government, the less of that feeling I had. So it was cool having this, director, blah, 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 title, whatever else statewide. It was cool, but I never felt like I could actually see. I knew the good stuff was happening, but I was so detached, I never got to actually see it. And then ironically, as you're getting into those senior positions, it's almost a trade-off between money and prestige. So those federal positions at the senior level pay less than the state, and they kind of work their way down. So depending on where you're looking to be and how big a factor money is, I certainly wouldn't discount local government.
I appreciate that. And thank you too for coming and talking to us and taking the time to come talk to us. I really appreciate it.
So I actually have another question. Unfortunately, this audience member's mic isn't working, Shannon. So her question was, what are some ways that the current interest in diversity efforts can be prolonged and embedded into the culture of recruitment in different fields?
I'll take that one first. So I would say the single most important part is to build it into the culture of the organization, but that requires buy-off from every level. So you've got to have the senior level, because you can't go off and do some major shift that the bosses haven't signed off on. But it also can't be something just that the bosses said, hey, you guys go do this stuff. The folks on the front line who do the actual work have to buy off on it as well. So if you look at it in terms of, so within a law enforcement agency, the police chief can say the new rule is we're not going to do this, so we're going to approach this way, or whatever it is. And technically that's the rule, maybe people follow. But the ones who actually do that stuff are the patrol officers, the frontline folks who go out there who actually deal with suspects and do all that stuff. And their world revolves around their first line supervisor, their sergeant. So if you're a sheriff deputy, a police officer, it's one thing to have the chief say so, or the mayor say so, or the city manager say so. It's very different to have your sergeant say so. And if you can align those various levels of the organization, I think you've got the best shot of embedding it. And that's what's required, in my opinion, to be able to prolong it so it doesn't end up being just a split.
And then how about you, Jamil? Do you want to tackle that one as well, or?
Ask the question one more time. I'm sorry.
So, what are some ways that the current interest in diversity efforts can be prolonged and embedded into the culture of recruitment in different fields?
What Kurt said was good. I really don't know the answer to that right now.
That's fine. Pooja, you had an earlier question. Do you want to ask that one as well? Pooja, can you hear me?
Yes, I just have a lot of background noise.
Okay.
So could you ask my question for me?
Yes, I can do
The
that.
landscapers are here.
Okay, no worries. So very early on, we kind of talked about like feelings of discomfort that you might have for some like everyday interactions. So just touching on that. Okay, so have these feelings of discomfort, have you felt that in the workplace? And can you kind of expand on those?
You saying, have we had discomforts? I don't understand what you're asking.
So like discomfort in like everyday interactions, things of that nature, in the workplace.
I'm sorry.
So
Well, I'll start with it if you want.
Mhm. Sure.
So I'd say that all the things that make it uncomfortable in a workplace, or in just regular driving around, they all exist in the workplace. One distinction is, depending on the type of work you do, you may sort of be around the same group of people. So the more you sort of get to know sort of how they think, how they act, that puts you in a little bit of a better place. But if you end up sort of thinking of it in terms of what your role is, then it's different. So it's one thing if I'm driving on the freeway and I see the lights, there's a certain thing that sort of kicks in for me, and I go to that place. But in the workplace, if if my role is something where it's my job to go in and take charge and do those things, then I'm going to go in and take charge and do all those things. So it doesn't impact me the same way, because, you know, whether I'm in a uniform or whether I'm doing city manager work or whatever it is, my job is to go in, take control, fix stuff, and then go on to the next thing. So it's just sort of an occupational designation that sort of makes it so that that's not an option. I don't have the luxury of debating whether or not so-and-so is going to like what I say, or if this is going to be okay, because I've got a job, and that sort of overrides it. As soon as I leave, get back in my car, I'm right back to the same thing.
Great, that makes sense. Like, just kind of get in, do your job, and get out. That's definitely a good mentality. Jamil, how about you?
I agree with Kurt on that. If I'm at work, I'm gonna do my job, and in my personal life, it's gonna be a little different.
Thank you so much. So just in these last few minutes, I wanted to have do a quick gratitude activity with the audience. So if you don't mind, everyone, if you mind putting in the chat, so it's just something you're grateful from about this conversation. So just, and then you can send it to everyone as well. So we're in our last minute. Any final words from our speakers? So first of all, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for coming, everyone. Okay, so I see Pooja saying thank you, Kurt and Jamil, for being so open with us and sharing your stories. Any final words from you two?
I thank you guys for having me, for having us. Um, I'm always excited about what students are going to do here in this program. I'm always excited to see what you guys are going to be doing 5 and 10 years from now. I'm quite sure it's going to be amazing work.
Thank you. And I'm seeing some comments coming in. So thank you for perspective and honesty. Thank you for sharing your experiences. It was wonderful to hear your perspectives. Grateful for your honesty. For some career advice, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here for our students in our program. And someone also said, I am also from Compton, so thank you. Kurt, any final words?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say everybody who's on this call, if you're already a student at Pepperdine, then you've already cleared some pretty significant hurdles. So you're already leaps and bounds ahead of most people. You know, I've got a pretty good idea what it takes to even get into the program, and the sacrifice and the hard work that comes when you're in it, but even just beforehand to get accepted into the program. So I think everyone who's in this program is off to a very, very good start. And most of you probably already have some pretty impressive professional credentials as well. And I think I'd speak for Jamil as well when I'd say either of us is more than happy to help. Anything that we can do, you can always just reach out to us, and we're more than happy to help.
Great, thank you so much. So two final comments. So appreciative of both of you as an alumni and faculty, and for sharing SBP. Thanks to Jamil and Kurt, very insightful. So those are two comments from our audience members. So we're a little bit over. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. This is a really great event. We're recording it, so it will be available later for those of us who weren't able to make it. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.